Alright, here we go. We meet again, Mr. Nations. I have been informed of your transgressions against Icelandic sovereignty. I ask you, if you are willing to allow the people of Iceland to fall under Canadian dominion so callously, perhaps you would also allow the King of England to set foot in Cornwall without the express permission of the Duke. Those are two very different places, Mr. Shinko. I'd argue that if the king were to set foot in Cornwall, it wouldn't be the law he'd have to worry about. No, of course not. The will of the Cornish people would drive him off our sacred land quite quickly, I believe. And yet you would prevent me from taking up the cause of Icelandic sovereignty? Forgive me, Mr. Nations, but you are a tad bit hypocritical if you will not allow the Icelandic people to resist the Canadian imperialist. If you were to have actually read our humble guidelines here on World at War, you'd see we value this little thing called realism. You can't seriously believe the Icelandic people of all folk would stand up to the Dominion of Canada. It's preposterous. But Mr. Nations, the Icelandic people need not lift a finger. Realistically, our Kingdom of Iceland would have succeeded from the Danish realm upon the announcement of a sale without their consent. This would all be perfectly legal, of course, as the Kingdom of Iceland has been recognized as an independent state since 1918, and has had full control of its foreign affairs and defense since its recognition. This is furthermore proved by the declaration of Icelandic independence in our time following the fall of Denmark. Indeed, by allowing the sale to go through unhindered, you are in fact the unrealistic party here. Here, that is where you are wrong. The King of Iceland is merely a puppet. Do you know who runs the Kingdom of Iceland, Lukashenko? A Dane. A Dane in particular, who also runs the Kingdom of Denmark. Now isn't that interesting? If the Canadians were offering a large sum as seen, I'm sure our beloved Christian X would be able to make the constitutional changes necessary to facilitate such a sale. I believe in this is what they call in the casino, an ace in the hole. God, fuck off, Bronny. But Mr. Nations, the only common trait shared between Denmark and Iceland is that they share a monarch. Everything else is functionally different, with Iceland having its own recognized government, constitution, and institutions. To change the Icelandic law, the King of Denmark would need the consent of the Icelandic government. And therein lies the problem, as unconstitutional changes would trigger succession before the sale took place. I believe this is where the road ends for you. I have an ace. I asked an Icelandic friend of mine what he'd do if Iceland was sold to the Dominion of Canada during the 1930s. You know what he said? He said he would not care. You see, the Icelandic people are rather simple in that way. Like many small European countries, these monarchs mean nothing, nor national identity. So long as business goes on as usual, the Icelandic people have no reason to dissent. I'm afraid, Mr. Shinko, you have no dice. Perhaps this would be the end for me, if I had not expected this. You see, Mr. Nations, I have been in contact with 2 Icelandic friends, who also happen to be qualified staff members on another amino. They suggested that Iceland would have succeeded and resisted Canada to the last, due to, and I quote, a burning hatred of Anglo-imperialism. Have you ever heard the quotation, playing your cards right? Because you are clearly not doing so far. I have to question the validity of these so-called Icelandic friends. You see, Britain has never colonized the island. Why on earth would they detest the British? In fact, the only imperialism they have been subject to is that of the Danes. This sale brings a new opportunity of reasonable self-governance for the Icelandic people. You are correct, Mr. Nations. The Icelandic people have valiantly resisted Anglo-imperialism throughout their history. However, throughout the 15th century, many English traders and fishermen have attempted to come to Iceland to steal their markets. And we as Britishmen both know how these Icelandic feel about their cod markets. Such an intergenerational hatred is to be expected. And the Icelandic people would certainly not tolerate anyone but themselves having access to Icelandic cod. Hence the need for the Danes to grant them independence under personal union in the first place. Sorry, can I have a second? My apologies. A bit of the old asthma. You see, that isn't imperialism, my dear friend. That is the matter of internal affairs, which, get this, would be significantly lessened by joining with the Dominion of Canada, who have a lot more power to negotiate with Britain regarding such matters on much more admissible terms than the Danes or an independent Iceland ever would. This is clear-cut imperialism. You have been on my side if the involved party was not a scenario nations veteran, Mr. Nations. And besides, perhaps the Icelandic people would be open to Canadian annexation if this had been the original agreement. However, the Icelandic people have bared witness to the ruthless exploitation of their Greenlandic brethren by the Dominion of Canada for many years prior. It is safe to say that they would not be welcoming to Canadian occupation after seeing the mass Anglo-Canadian settlement of Greenland without regard for their Nordic brethren, and the ruthless exploitation of the Greenlandic wilderness. It is odd you mention Essen